Okay, welcome back. This is the fourth time I'm trying T'nT today. I now have my computer hardwired right into the plugged into the modem. So this should work now. For those who didn't see earlier, I've tried 3 different times and the internet kept dropping on me. So this is what I'm doing now. I'm doing it on my computer. The picture's not as sharp, but that's okay. Anyway, and I feel like T'nT. I was about to explode because I have no patience with technology when it doesn't work right. Anyway, welcome everyone. Today is Tuesday. It is June 30th, 2020. It's a day we celebrate the memorial of the first martyrs of Rome. And last week with T'nT, I was talking a lot in the previous week about marriage as a sacrament. And now I want to get into the whole aspect just with children, raising of children, try to get into some practical points. How do you help informing their character, help them grow in virtue? What are some things to be attentive to? What are subtle things to be attentive to? Things that can influence your children for good or for ill. Different ages, what one must be mindful of. But there's some just basic core things that are always true. And that's why, as a priest, obviously I don't have any children. I have lots of nephews and nieces, but I don't have any children. There are certain things that are just true because of our human nature. And so even though maybe certain forms of development have changed over the years of different practices, there are certain things that one just always has to be attentive to. But to link to that, today to finish up really with the sacrament of marriage, I want to talk about just the third aspect in the intention when a couple is getting married for the sacrament, that we know that when God created Adam and Eve, this is where our core understanding of marriage comes from, of the permanence of the bond, the two becoming one. Also because of that, the unitive aspect, the exclusivity aspect, that's not 3 or more. Even though when you read the Old Testament, this morning, Liturgy Hours, read about David, and David's keeps mentioning these different wives that he had. And obviously then Solomon, who became very corrupt because of his many wives, and his harem and things like that. But actually, from the very beginning, we'd say it's revealed to us by God that marriage is exclusive between a man and a woman. And as God forms that bond, he also gives the command to Adam and Eve, be fruitful, multiply. And this is also essential for the bond to be formed. And that's why we talk about the openness to life, that intention to have children. Whether a couple is actually able to have a child, maybe they find out later they're infertile or the physical complications, things like that. Whether they have a child is a different story. But for the bond to be formed, there has to be that intentionality, that openness to having children. And if blessed with a child or blessed with children, that one does intend to raise them in love. And not only the love of the husband and wife, but most importantly, in the love of God, to raise them in faith. And that's why, for example, I had a wedding on Saturday night. I had one Sunday that for the couples, asking about their intention to enter into marriage, that asking them, are they prepared to accept children from God and to raise them according to the laws of Christ and his church? And they said, we are, or I am. And so that's a core thing in that openness to life. Now, with that openness to life, obviously, first is a trust in God. And sometimes people can be afraid about having children. They see the struggles that come with it, or they look at society and they see how problematic things are, and people think, well, I would never want to raise a child in this day and age. But we have to trust that God knows better. And that in that trust, that when God entrusts a parent with a child or with children, God's doing it out of love. And for the couple, they are participating in God's creative power. And so in that openness to having life, of having children, they're participating in God's work. Obviously, they have to participate for the conception to happen. There's only one conception in all of history that happened where there was not the man and woman involved there, and that's with Our Lady conceiving by the power of the Holy Spirit. But with every couple, that intention has to be there. Now, with that intentionality, I think also it's not only a trust in God, but also it's a call of generosity of heart. And this is something couples must pray about, that you can have a couple that has just one child, but the fact is that they are extremely generous, that they've wanted to have more, but they just, for some reason, they can't. Others, they may have, God may bless them with many children, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 13 children. And the church has always seen, for example, when we talk about like large families, the scriptures and the church, you see it especially in the scriptures, it's always seen as a blessing from God. Our society doesn't see it that way. That especially some of you that may have had several children, at times you may have people make comments to you, very rude comments. And really what's rooted in, by those that make those comments, it's rooted in a deep selfishness on their part. Because many times they've not been open. They've not been generous. I don't mean to sound like I'm judging someone, but just knowing sometimes when people react in these ways, make certain just uncalled for comments to total strangers, it's because there's something there, I think, often in their conscience that stirs when they see someone with more than one child or two children. But it's first and foremost, it's for every couple, it's that call to generosity and to trust in God. And that's why I've known incredible families with couples who are not able to have children, and yet they're responding with this generosity. It's just in that mystery of God's will, God did not allow them to be able to conceive. For others, in that total generosity, they really are striving to carry out what they believe God has asked of them. And yet maybe even in their discernment, they may have discerned that though they're trying to be a truly generous heart, they may have discerned that in their circumstance, it might be hard for them to have more than a child or two children or three children, whatever it may be. But it's just this to always come back to the core thing, first and foremost, that openness to life, to see life as a gift. Yes, are there challenges with it, especially for the woman who carrying the child for the 9 months? Are there difficulties? Most certainly. But it's in the face of that difficulty to know that after the child's born, to see that, look at this beautiful mystery, this beautiful gift that God has given. And then for the man and the woman, how do they help form that child? How do they be an instrument to form that child to know and live in the love of God, in that heart of Christ, in the teachings of Christ and his church? That's why we ask this as they're about to say their vows to each other. We ask in that intention. Now, with that openness, it's a call to give life, as the Catechism says. Called to give life, spouses share in the creative power and fatherhood of God. What an awesome thing, an awesome thought. And for those in the Catechism, if you want to kind of read some points on it, it's 2366 through 2372. But then after that, then they talk about the gift of the child in 2373 through 2379. So I encourage you to read it. But obviously, the Catechism is also written for not just for all the faithful, but in particular for theologians, bishops too. So sometimes there can be terminology that might be a little bit, sometimes just theological terminology might be a little bit over the head, and it's a little bit in that section. Not much, but it's a little bit there. But anyway, so in that call to life, it's knowing that there's a great responsibility of the couple to be able to discern, is God calling us to have more children? Or sometimes with just reasons, serious reasons, a couple might realize, they had the generous heart, but they might realize it'd be really hard for us if we read now, as we're trying to discern, and we're praying about it. So it's not being driven by a form of like selfishness, like, well, we want to do all these things for ourselves, and therefore to have another child would be difficult. No, that's selfishness. But when couples are really trying to discern and they realize, whether it be, say, for physical reasons, most likely physical reasons for the wife, if she would have a child right now, it might be very difficult for her. Maybe it might be for serious financial reasons. Again, not selfish financial reasons. Well, we want to have all this money and things like that. No, that people just realize when they look at things and think, if we had a child right now, this might be really hard for us. Now, if they conceive, obviously they embrace the child. And that's that trust that God will somehow provide for us. God will help us in this journey. But that in that discernment, when couples realize, with that openness to life, but they realize because of whether it's physical reasons, psychological reasons, uh, financial reasons, that when looking at those things and they realize right now we think it'd be best if we try to refrain from conceiving, then what does the church teach there? And obviously, what did many in the medical field and what does our society say, in the Western culture in particular, it just says, well, then use contraceptions. And the church has always spoke out against that. And you actually have it in some of the ancient writings outside the scriptures. The church's whole teaching about sexual morality, it's all rooted in the scriptures and in the sacred tradition. And it's not, well, it's just this old way. No, it's a real understanding of humanity and the human person and the needs of the human person. Now, our understanding has grown tremendously, I would say, in the last few decades. And the church's reflection on it has gone much deeper, in particular through the writings of Pope St. John Paul II. He did a lot of reflecting on it. Now, some of his writings, in particular, what's called the Theology of the Body, that one is not a definitive teaching of the church, but his writings on it are totally in line with the sacred tradition and with the sacred scriptures. And so that's why you hear a lot will say, well, these insights of John Paul II about marital love, about children, about openness to life, things like that, has great insights, especially in that very personal aspect of it. So that might be something for some of you, if you want to really delve into it, you want to look into what's called the Theology of the Body of John Paul II. It was his Wednesday audiences did for a number of years, where he slowly taught on this. But it's beautiful, very deep, but beautiful stuff theology that he's written. But when it comes to contraception, the church has always taught that a couple cannot, in an intentional way, block conception from happening, especially through any artificial means. And that's what contraception does. But Pope St. Paul VI wrote about in his letter called Humanae Vitae, encyclical letter on the gift of life, that he said that with contraception, what happens is that it's intentionally separating the meaning of the sexual act, or the marital act, that separates the procreative and the unitive. And he even prophesied about what, if we go this path, what will be the fruits of it. And what he spoke of, we've seen actually completely happen in our world. For example, the objectification of women, treating women more as objects. Why? Because we lose that awareness of the mystery of the woman of her motherhood and her dignity in that. And so when we separate that, it then affects how we see the other. And so that was one thing. And it doesn't take us much to see women have become more and more objects. You see it in entertainment, you see it in magazines, you see it on the internet, objectifying the woman. And there's a link there with contraception. A very interesting stat was back in the late 60s, just that statistics of the use of contraception use had increased tremendously. At the same exact rate, interesting enough, was the increase of the divorce rate in the United States. Those two climbed almost the exact same rate. As more and more people using contraception, it started to impact their marriages, because even though contraception may seem to relieve that stress about, are we possibly going to have a child here? Can we afford to have a child? Things like that. It causes disastrous effects. So as Dr. Janet Smith, who does many talks about contraception, if you never heard her talks, I highly recommend you listen to them. She's got one called Contraception, Why Not? And great insights that she has on it. But she points out the basic thing about the marital act, sexual act, it's about babies and bonding, the unitive and the procreative. Because the sexual act is about also the intimacy of the spouses, that love to grow. And so contraception affects that. And obviously we know there are many forms of contraception, but it has so many effects. And today I don't have time to get into all those different things. That's why I recommend you listen to talks by Dr. Janet Smith. But what I want to focus on is just that aspect of what is the couple being called to do. So if the church says, well, you can't use contraception, then people say, well, what can we do? Because for our society in a way. This is all we know, that if we don't want to have kids, this is what we have to do. And the church says, this is why the church teaches about what's called natural family planning. What natural family planning is, it's not, sometimes there's like this old method called the rhythm method, that there was this thought that every woman just had the same rhythm in her cycle, and you just got to follow the rhythm. And the church says, no, that natural family planning is most basic way, and there's a lot more to it, but just to give you the basic with it, with natural family planning, what's basically doing is trying to understand the woman's body, the individual woman. So it's not treating all women like the same, like just this big kind of carte blanche thing and say, well, this is the way it is. It's that trying to understand for each woman, understanding her fertility, and that understanding basically in the periods when she begins to ovulate, that's the period when she can conceive. So it's in that period, however long it lasts, however so many days it lasts, the couple out of love, so it's not an intentional way like with contraception, an intentional way of just saying, we're trying to keep conception from happening. With natural family planning, the couple decides in that period when the woman's ovulating, and also just physically for a man, naturally, it's actually the period when he's most drawn to her physically. It's the way God has wired us. So there's a sacrifice that occurs here. What happens is, in that period, then the husband and wife refrain from engaging in the sexual act. And they refrain out of love because they've discerned already through looking at their situation, through their prayer, through making sure that it's rooted in generosity of heart. They have discerned about, right now, we think using right reason, using through our prayer, that we think it would be best for us to do it best not to try to conceive this time. And so out of love, they refrain from the sexual act in that period until the ovulation period has completed. And her body indicates that period. And that's why with natural family planning, it helps the woman to understand how do you recognize that period and how to understand your particular body. Two very popular methods. One is called the Creighton method. It's a very detailed method. It requires every day a certain type of tracking, charting, I should say, of what's going on for the woman. And that way that it helps the woman understand, and knowing herself, periods when she is beginning to ovulate, but also helps the husband understand, help him understand what's going on with his wife physically, so he can, many times, as husbands have told me, it really helps them to love their wife so much better. But obviously there's a certain kind of work in that. Another method, which as our parish we're going to begin some training with soon, if you go to our parish website, hopefully in the next few days you'll see information on it. It's called the Marquette method, because it is rooted in a method developed by Marquette University in Wisconsin. That also has a way of charting, but it's not as extensive as the Creighton method. But some also found it's a lot easier. And it's helped them to kind of relieve certain forms of stress of wondering, is it okay for us to engage in the marital act or not at this time or not? And so with this method, it really helps couples. And so we're going to start doing training, because actually in our diocese it's very hard to find training in natural family planning, and yet it's the expectation that every married couple knows about it. But most couples for several decades now in our diocese, at least since I was ordained, they used to offer it in our diocese when I first ordained, and it stopped only after a few years. So it's been some time that couples have not received any teaching on it, except couples who have made their own effort to find out. So at ours, we're going to start having some training sessions for couples, younger couples preparing for marriage, but also for others who just want to grow in their understanding. Just to be attentive, check out the parish website to find out about it. Hopefully in the next few days we'll have a video posted up there and talk about, we're going to start doing some of these trainings in it. But it's such an important thing. It helps foster the dignity of life. It helps foster the love of the spouses. It does, obviously, there's an aspect of sacrifice involved. It can be hard at times, but it's knowing that one is seeking to grow in your love together and that openness to children as God calls you. And that's what the church seeks to. This is what the church wants for you. The church wants you to have a happy marriage. The church wants you to be blessed in your home life, in your married life. And God wants it too. And children are an important part in all that. Now, so tomorrow, this kind of finish up here with marriage now. Obviously, there are a lot more things that I got into, But just wanted to touch on that openness to life. And obviously, if you know for yourselves, if contraception was part of your marriage, or maybe it still is, how do you allow God to help you, guide you in that conversion of heart, to trust in the Lord here, to learn what is it God is asking of you? And if you have used contraception, okay, then you bring that to confession, to ask the Lord for forgiveness, to start again, to learn from it, so you can grow. And then you can help others to grow. And I've known couples who, one couple in particular told me how contraception was part of their life, and they thought it was just, this is a normal thing. And then finally, when they came to really understand what the church was teaching and see how the church truly loves them in teaching it, and they realizing the sin that's involved with contraception, they started to learn about natural family and family planning. And even though they were a little bit older, they're already at that point of not really being able to have children, they said it really changed their marriage in a beautiful way. And that's what God wants, something beautiful for you. So trusting the Lord there. So we're going to start to get into the raising of children. And I know let's see, I think it was Michelle sent me a question about it. For example, we'll get into the part of raising children with husband and wives, but also raising children when one is by yourself. If your spouse is not in the picture, or even if your spouse is in the picture, but almost acting as a roadblock, making things more difficult in what you're trying to do. How do you face that? What is it that God's asking of you? So I'm going to try to delve into all those things. So hopefully it will help. And again, I apologize with the internet. I have no idea. Again, the modem is literally right behind me, and I was having all sorts of problems. So I had to run down to the church. I had to grab my Ethernet cable from down there to run up here to plug it into the modem and plug my computer in. So I'm not using the picture's not as sharp because it's sharper on my phone. But anyway, always something. And let's finish up here with a little Frank Sinatra. And I want to thank all of you for joining me again. I apologize for any problems that we had here today with the previous efforts to run the T'nT. And we'll delve into family life, delve into kids, and raising them. A great challenge, but a great gift. And that's all. Hope all of you have a wonderful day. Now I got to figure out how to oh, there it is. I got to figure out how to stop the session on my computer. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.